there's too many options there. There's too many options going forward.
I don't feel like criticism against him has been particularly unfair. I don't think it's been particularly harsh.
And I think Switzerland go into this quarterfinals favourites, if I'm totally honest.
Hello and welcome back to Monday Vibes, everybody. The Euros last 16 clashes are in full swing. We have had four still to go. A lot of entertainment here to make sense of it all. I've got Mikey McCubb in. McCubbs, how are you doing?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Diggs. Absolute emotional roller coaster yesterday.
Exhausting, wasn't
Still not quite over it. It was just such a strange game, wasn't it? It was such a strange game.
England's worst at the tournament.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with. I think it's certainly it's certainly up there with the Denmark game. I think, whereas all the other games England have looked pretty inept going forward for much of those games. This game, England looked pretty bad defensively, at least in the first half, and for the first time in quite a long time at a major tournament. Well, I guess since France at World Cup 2022, but for the first time in what seems like an age, gave up the initiative and were chasing the game, and watching England try to chase the game for 70 minutes was a really, really tough watch. But I mean, the man of the moment, Jude Bellingham, after all the criticism that he's faced, after the the performances that he's put in, I think he's faced a bit of unfair criticism as well. I don't think the number 10 position in this England setup is the best position for him personally, but nevertheless he has looked far from his best. But to step up in a moment like that with 30 seconds remaining of the game, I mean, yeah, it's hard to think of as dramatic a goal in a major tournament for England in the last minute. I can't really think of one since Daniel Sturridge against Wales, but in 2016, much higher stakes in this game. Southgate's job on the line. I think if Bellingham doesn't score that, 30 seconds later the whistle goes, I think the first thing that Gareth Southgate does in his post-match press conference is announces his resignation. Mm-hmm. I really think that's what happens. I don't think he would have got sacked. I think he would have announced his resignation. And you would have felt fair enough, because I think it really did feel like this was the culmination of a tournament which so far has maybe felt like one too many. I've always backed Southgate massively. And backed him massively going into this tournament, but this was the first tournament where it felt like, with his squad selection, with his team selection, that he was abandoning a little bit the kind of principles that he had before, in terms of picking kind of the system first and the players second, and to suit that system. This tournament, he has tried to shoehorn in all his best players. And he's been, he has been stubborn at points in terms of, bringing on Cole Palmer a bit too late in games, bringing on someone like Ivan Toney so late, in this game. Like, although the Ivan Toney substitution was genius, by the way, absolute genius. The assist, and I think the destabilisation he brings into the box for those two long throws. I don't think Bellingham scores without that, so that was brilliant. Despite Tony clearly not too happy with the timing of that sub. But yeah, back to Southgate, it just feels like it does feel like he's lost a bit of what he had in previous tournaments, and we're still waiting for a good England display over 90 minutes. England have struggled.
Still waiting for a good full half.
Yeah, it's pretty insane that England are going to the quarterfinals in this vein of form, and yeah, it was palpable where I was watching it with Zach and Kieran, and in the pub we were watching it at, there were a bit of celebrations at the end, but then people left pretty soon after.
Was there quite a lot of anger bubbling beforehand?
A bit,
I think, a bit more sort of
and kind of apathy. Yeah, I think it was just like it was 3 minutes of brilliance from England, from kind of set piece situations, sandwiched between 120 minutes of just pretty dire football. I know England kind of controlled that second half in general, but as soon as they went ahead, it was back. It was backs to the walls again. And I think if extra time had gone on for another 10 minutes, I think Slovakia score, and then suddenly you're looking at, hypothetically, looking at penalties without Kane or Bellingham on the pitch. It's yeah, it was pretty sorry stuff for much of the game. But nevertheless, you do also need to bask in the moment. Like Bellingham did give the fans in the stadium, especially, an amazing moment, and I'm sure the atmosphere was absolutely brilliant in Gelsenkirchen. And we've seen, it feels like Bellingham's got that kind of, since going to Real Madrid, especially, has really, this kind of aura, this clutch, this kind of almost kind of Ronaldo-esque. Like, how many times have we seen Real Madrid over the years play really, really badly in a knockout game, and someone like Ronaldo bailed them out, or earlier in this season, Real Madrid first 2 months of the season where they were playing pretty poorly, almost succumbing to pretty bad defeats against poor opposition, and Jude Bellingham pops up in the last minute. He does have that about him, and the thing that sets apart elite sides from very good sides. I think Slovakia are a very, very good side, but the thing that sets England apart is that even if they are playing terribly and deserve to lose, they have a player like Bellingham or a player like Kane who can produce at that moment and bail you out. We have to be very thankful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought his press conference, or his comments in the press about, people have been talking too much about him, I actually don't really buy that, to be totally honest. I feel like he's had very fair criticism after two very flat games in the group stages. And I feel like, there's very few English players that I can remember that have had this sort of Messiah-like status for an entire season. I think it's partly because he plays for Real Madrid and he doesn't play in the Premier League. So people sort of, you escape criticism naturally through lack of contact with the player, and also the season he had at Real Madrid for sure. But there was games at Real Madrid last season where he didn't play particularly well and still turned up in big moments. But massive respect for him for doing that. But I don't feel like criticism against him has been particularly unfair. I don't think it's been particularly harsh. People have just said, you look at Florian Wirtz being dropped or benched, I should say, for that game against Denmark. Sometimes big decisions have to be made, and Bellingham wasn't playing particularly well in this game again. Fair enough, he turns up in a big moment, but I think it's only right that people question his place in the side when England have an abundance of attacking talent. You could play Cole Palmer centrally, you could play Phil Foden centrally, and instead we persisted with, which it did turn out to be right, or at least it came good in the end, with this Kane-Bellingham partnership that was offering next to nothing. I know Kane actually had a pretty nice moment where he created the pass that led to that Phil Foden goal, which was offside. But other than that, his lack of movement throughout the entire game, throughout every game of this Euros, is quite troubling. Doesn't look fully fit to me. He doesn't look fully mobile. He doesn't look at his sharpest. He almost doesn't look at his hungriest, which is something that you've never associated with Harry Kane. And for England to score from their only 2 shots on target in 120 minutes, really worrying. Spain had 13 shots on target yesterday against Georgia, which is the same amount that England have had in the entire tournament so far. It's quite troubling. Yeah. It is quite troubling. And yes, I'm delighted to be through to the quarterfinals as an England fan. But I don't think anyone here sitting here this morning is feeling particularly confident about playing the Swiss, would feel confident going into any semi-final should we get past Switzerland. And whoever will be on the other side of the draw would go into that final, if it was against England, as massive favourites as well. It feels like we are waiting for the inevitable knockout. It just doesn't feel like you can play this well and get to a final. It just really doesn't. England played so much better at Euro 2020. They played much better at the World Cup in 2018. And even in Qatar, I think they played significantly better as well. This has been a kind of baffling level of underperformance. And it feels like they just lack so much confidence. And yes, that might be coming from media reaction, but they lacked it in the first game of this tournament. We can't just pretend that it's all on Southgate. I think he's got some in-game decisions terribly wrong, but I agreed with his general squad selection from the start. I didn't think Rashford played well enough to go. I didn't think Grealish did either. It was a shame to miss Maguire, but he was injured. I thought he got the squad pretty spot on, but some of those in-game decisions, you can argue about that. But England just have... they have a little bit of momentum now, but even the way they finished extra time there, it just doesn't feel like they're carrying much momentum going into Switzerland whatsoever, who have a day more to recover and who played 30 minutes less. I'm sorry to be so doomsday. But I'm really quite lost with this England team at the moment.
I do think, in hindsight, and it's something I thought about but didn't really shout that much about at the time, because it's, it would have been a rogue selection in many respects because of his lack of England experience. But you do think, with the problems that have been created, and I don't think Trippier has really played terribly during this tournament. In fact, I think when he was moved up to the left wing for that first 10 minutes of the second half, he looked pretty effective. But given that he clearly is just never going to use his left foot, and Shaw's injury issues, like you do just think, like, given that Southgate was bold with quite a few selections, like you could have taken a chance on someone like Leif Davis, who was probably the best English left back in the country, or Tyrick Mitchell, who's played for England. Like, there's just someone there
who must have about 15-20 caps.
Yeah, like
I know he didn't play well for Chelsea last year, but
were there fitness issues around him as well, potentially? But either way, there were options there. It's just like we could have had a left-footed like option there without Shaw. Like, we could have. And that troubles me, especially given that Joe Gomez has barely featured as well. Like, that is one piece of criticism I would now lay at his door in terms of squad selection. But I think you're right, Dukes, and I think every England player can lay claim, to be honest, to having been singled out at some point. So many times it's like, oh, we're just picking on Phil Foden now, aren't we? Oh, we're just picking on Trent, Jude Bellingham now. Oh, we're just picking on Trent. Yeah. And there are a few players who have probably had a bit of an exaggerated magnifying glass on them. But it's a struggle to look at anyone in this side aside from John Stones and Mark Gehi and say that they've had a good tournament. I think Declan Rice has been well below par in the centre of midfield, and I don't think that's been spoken about all that much. He's had three different partners alongside him, and none of them have worked. And the common denominator there is Declan Rice. I don't think he's been able to build up a rapport with anyone. Like, even Kobbie Mainoo, who I think looked really, really bright at points yesterday, there still doesn't seem to be a huge connection between him and Rice. And Rice is one of the most undroppable players in that team. There just isn't really a number 6 who is at his level, unless you really want to take a chance on Adam Wharton. That would be crazy, I think, going into a quarter final at this point. I would have loved to have seen Wharton play alongside Rice earlier in the tournament, but it just doesn't feel like his chance is going to come now so late in the Euros. So yeah, he is undroppable, but that doesn't mean that he's not been a bit of a problematic player in this side. Like you say, Kane, Foden has looked bright in points, but only really when he's coming outside of the position that he's playing. By the end of the game, you had Eze and Saka at wing back. You had kind of Konsa, backing up, and Ivan Toney I thought was absolutely sensational when he came on. Not just the involvements in the goal, but in extra time, his ability to win possession. I think he won 4 aerial duels, absolutely brilliant. But let's go on to this Switzerland game, because. Switzerland have been one of the teams of the tournament. Only Germany and Spain have scored more than them. I think only Germany, Austria and Portugal have conceded fewer shots on target than them. I think Manuel Akanji has been one of my players of the tournament. He's been absolutely immense at the back. I think he's blocked more shots than anyone else left in the competition. I think only Toni Kroos among midfielders in the competition has made more passes into the final third than Xhaka, which I think Toni Kroos has made 64 passes into the final third this tournament.
Wow.
If Germany win this tournament, I think Kroos has got to get the Ballon d'Or, to be honest. Like, he's been so good. He's been so good this tournament. He was so good for Madrid last season. And also the fact that he's retiring, I think just the narrative, you just got to give it to him personally. But I digress. But this Switzerland team under Murat Yakin are so well organised. And individually, I feel like a lot of players have really stepped up this tournament as well. Remo Freuler, 3 goal involvements, which is more than he managed for Bologna last season. Yeah, brilliant goal to open the scoring against Italy. They probably should have beaten Germany. I think they were a better team overall of those 90 minutes. They absolutely annihilated Italy, who haven't been up to much themselves. But you can say the same about England. I think Switzerland went into that Italy game as favourites, actually. I think it was just Italy's reputation that meant that people were backing them. And I think Switzerland go into this quarter-final as favourites, if I'm totally honest. Dukes, having watched England so far, having watched Switzerland so far, like what do you think Southgate needs to do? Like, does he need to drop someone, and does he need to change shape?
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because it feels like I think pretty much every attacking player's had some minutes now, but there doesn't feel like he's got like which is I think you do need to pick substitutions on game state. You need to pick them on certain opposition, but it doesn't feel like there's a clear pecking order. Like I am surprised that Anthony Gordon hasn't had more minutes.
Yeah,
but Eze's probably played more off the bench than him. Bowen played really well off the bench in the first game. It's now been Palmer who's been used on the right. Watkins was used off the bench for Kane at one stage. It was Tony yesterday. And yes, they do all have different skill set. But in terms of a clear strategy on who to drop and what to change, it's very difficult because Bellingham has just popped up with an unbelievable England moment. Like one of England's probably greatest tournament goals of all time. Definitely in the top 3, along with probably that Gaza goal. Struggling, and maybe that Joe Cole goal against Sweden probably is my top 3. Get in the comments if I'm missing something obvious. But Kane hasn't looked quite right, but do you drop him for a while? Do you drop him for a Euros quarterfinal? No. Bellingham hasn't looked quite right, but do you drop him for a Euros quarterfinal? No. Like Foden again. Like are they putting Anthony Gordon on, having played so few minutes now? I don't think so. One serious change that I would very much consider is I don't think Kyle Walker has been anywhere near his best this tournament, which troubles me. And I'd say the same for John Stones as well. Like John Stones has been pretty unflappable for 3 tournaments in a row. He's not been a disaster by any stretch, and he came in having not played very much football for Man City. But Kyle Walker, you've not been good enough this tournament, playing the horrendous onside for the goal yesterday. And I don't think he's offering enough in possession. He looks like under pressure pretty much every time he gets the ball. That link up with Saka is pretty much non-existent, and they've played with each other for a number of years now.
Yeah, it's his passing that has kind of troubled me the most, given that he is like known to be a great passer of the ball. And
it feels like he is like a lot of England players are taking the safe option at the moment, and it is creating further issues down the line because we are getting deeper and deeper. We're being pressed more and more. But players like Stones, players like Walker that take possession in difficult areas for Man City for 60 games, 55 games a season, this is where you are supposed to show what you're made of on the ball. And even like Declan Rice, I think, has been too negative on the ball at times as well. And it is creating further issues. You look at somewhere like, which we'll come on to, Georgia last night. The way they just bomb forward, and it is a slightly different strategy. It's much more dribble-based than passing-based, but they look forward at every opportunity. And I think I might have my father-in-law's voice ringing in my ears, but I do think England were too negative. He was just shouting, go forwards, and it was slightly frustrating across 120 minutes, but he does have a point at times. Like, it was far too negative. But I haven't really answered your question in terms of changes. I would maybe consider Trent, but then Ibischer, Switzerland's left wing-back, is really sharp, has looked really electric at points this tournament. And Kyle Walker is a very good one-on-one defender, and he hasn't actually really had to show it so far in this tournament. I'd probably go unchanged, which does seem kind of mental, but I'd be prepared to use subs earlier.
Yeah, so you wouldn't advocate for potentially matching up Switzerland formation-wise, going to a 3 at the back, changing the shape. I mean,
I say unchanged. They'll have to change Gehi.
Well, they do have to change Gehi. Yeah, who do you? Like, I mean, I guess it's a choice between Gomez, Dunk, and Konsa.
Oh, it's not ideal, is it?
It's not ideal.
It's not ideal at all. I'd probably go with Ezri Konsa. I think he's had a better season than Lewis Dunk, although a lot of those minutes did come at right back. I think Dunk is more mistake prone at the moment than Ezri Konsa, to be totally honest. So I can't really remember making too many mistakes for Aston Villa over the last few years. I think changing system now, I think maybe there's nothing to lose. I'm kind of really torn on this. Do you think that changing to a 5 at the back is the way to go?
It's a difficult one because there's not necessarily there's not the ready-made kind of. We don't know what that system looks like with this squad of players, right? But obviously we saw Saka play both at right wing back and left wing back yesterday. If Shaw's back, then maybe he goes to left wing back. But then I think that's a risk to start him in a game of this magnitude, having not played since February. So then you think, could someone like Gordon provide that width in a system like that? Ultimately, I think this is the problem. When you talk about all these attacking combinations that have been used, that was another gamble that Southgate took in taking so much attacking talent that it now feels like a little bit muddled in terms of like there's too many options there. There's too many options going forward, and if you were to drop, say, Foden on the left and bring Gordon in, and Gordon doesn't necessarily have the impact you want him to, then it's like, well, why didn't you try Eze there, or why didn't you stick with Foden there, or why didn't you instead bring Foden into the middle, or drop Bellingham for Cole Palmer, or drop Bellingham deeper into midfield? There's still so many questions, and we've still had so few answers.
Because it's almost a case to drop every player going forward for England. There really is. You can make an argument for every player.
Yeah, and I mean, and Southgate kind of made a statement against Denmark, didn't he, in terms of taking out the front three for the last 20-25 minutes. Like, it's not like he hasn't tried things, but very little of what he's tried has given us really much insight into what could happen going forward. Aside from, I guess, the performances of Cole Palmer, I think he has performed very well when he's come on. Tony again yesterday, but that's unorthodox. That's not something that I think Southgate will persist with, even though he played really, really well. But at the same time, one thing that, at least drawing on previous tournaments, is that you'd hope, and I think it would be true, that Southgate, there is a plan. There has been a plan for Switzerland in the quarterfinals. I think Switzerland were always going to be one of the more likely teams for England to face in the quarters, and so you'd hope that, going off what we know about Southgate's England setup, is that for the last 6 to 12 months there has been a game plan for this Switzerland side, and they are a very well-defined Switzerland side. They haven't lost. They've lost one game in 18. Like, they are, they have been incredibly. Yeah, they've played the system for a long time. They've been incredibly solid, especially since the 2022 World Cup. And they've got players who are well known in that England camp. But I do worry that Switzerland backline is going to be so hard to break down, and they've got a lot of pace in behind. The likes of Mbolo, the likes of Ndoye, who've really stepped up this tournament.
Rida has really good games against Italy as well.
The
Vargas scored that beautiful goal.
Brilliant goal from Vargas, who's been excellent too. Yeah, the England backline is going to be pegged back, and we're going to have to break down a really good Switzerland backline as well. It's going to be a really, really tough game, and I think, even if England play well, I think it will still take a moment of magic from one of our world-class players to get past the Swiss.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. I wish I could be more positive about England. It's almost impossible to. I'm a big Southgate defender generally over the last few years. I think we both have, to be honest, at various points, although have had criticism when it's justified, I think. But I just don't criticise him for criticism's sake. Yeah. But it is very troubling. I think there's going to be one hell of a documentary made in 20 years' time about what is going on behind the scenes in this tournament. There was actually Kelly Summers talking to Gary Lineker, I think after one of the midweek games, and he was like, what is it like in the England camp right now? And she said it is a little bit different to previous tournaments. Apparently a lot of England players, I was listening to a podcast last week as well, weren't as delighted as they have been in previous years with Southgate's initial squad selection. Didn't approve of some of them. Without naming names, I don't actually know who they were talking about specifically, but it doesn't feel like the happiest of camps. It feels, as you say, I think muddled is the perfect word for it, a little bit lethargic.
You look at that, and there are players that people have been calling to get dropped for years who did get dropped, like the likes of Henderson, the likes of Sterling. And from a fan's perspective, that's all well and good. But actual players in that England camp aren't necessarily going to be like, oh great, Henderson's out because he went to Saudi Arabia and has had a bad year. Like, a lot of them may well have been like, oh well, we've lost one of our biggest leaders in the dressing room, and someone who was like a really supportive person on the training ground. We've lost Raheem Sterling, who was our clutch player for years. Who had a poor season for Chelsea, but I think would have still been a pretty admirable performer, and probably would have brought more balance to this forward line. Obviously, this is in hindsight, but you could understand why there's destabilisation. There's less leaders. It's a younger squad. It's a different environment. There are lots of players who hadn't really played together before in that setup. Speaking mainly of the players who have been on the bench, but a lot of players who may not have really known each other before. But it also kind of felt inevitable. It felt like there was going to be a tournament where there had to be a bit of a change. Eras come and go, and yeah. But I guess the silver lining is that international tournaments, often are painful for England fans, and we've been a little bit spoilt in recent years. And as good as this squad is on paper, it's part of it. It's part of it, and you can just hope that there's going to be a reaction in the next game. But we'll see.
Absolutely.
Faith is
just to add one final thing about that, about the squad makeup as well. Like Rashford and Grealish have played with these players for years, and are
didn't even mention them.
Incredibly popular members of the squad. I mean, quite different characters, but particularly Jack Grealish is like one of the jokers of the team, probably a very popular man in it. I think Rashford's got so much respect in that squad as well. There was a lot of change. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to go back and say I was against the squad at the time, but it was a lot of change at once, all quite sudden before the tournament. Anyway, let's go on to something that really pepped me up last night. They actually did it because Spain-Italy was after a previous England game as well, and I was like, they are healing my soul whenever I watch Spain at the moment. And it was a similar story last night, McCubs. They had their, scare against Georgia, let's say, but what a performance, particularly in that second half.
Yeah, second half they were just absolutely brilliant, were they? And we've spoken a lot about Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal this tournament, but I mean,
they deserve it.
Just, two of the players of the tournament, and we speak about England's troubles going forward. It's like this is what happens when you've just got two wingers who are who really balance out the side. You've got Lamine Yamal who can go both ways on the wing. Brilliant. He's just been the best creator of this tournament, hasn't he, Lamine Yamal? I mean, 6 chances created in this game, seven shots as well from him. But I mean, Nico Williams really is the main goal threat there.
And his finish was spectacular as well.
They are so good, so calm, so and against the best goalkeeper of this tournament, who's made, I think, 30 saves from 38 shots faced. He's faced more shots, double the shots of anyone else in this tournament, Mamadashvili. To take him on one-on-one and just absolutely, just pick the perfect spot with the perfect amount of power says a lot about him. And lots of talk about him potentially going to Barcelona this summer, even chat about him going to Liverpool. I think I think Nico Williams can walk into almost any team in world football at this moment in time.
It's got to be a star.
Just what a star he is, and the fact that people were talking about, is this going to be a tournament in which Alvaro Morata can actually lead Spain? It hasn't really mattered. The wing play from those two has just been absolutely superb. Lamine Yamal, 16 years old. I mean, I was saying it yesterday. If all goes I mean, Lamine Yamal could end up winning a Ballon d'Or ahead of some really, really top players in the world, given the level that he's at this age. But anyway, I mean, Fabian Ruiz also excellent. Rodri obviously got his customary edge of the box goal. What a finish that was. I mean, not particularly dissimilar actually from the kind of touch and shot that Declan Rice tried against Slovakia and just about didn't happen. But yeah, I mean, what do you think, Dukes? De La Fuente is obviously, it feels like De La Fuente has kind of built on the work of Luis Enrique. He's kind of completed the job that Luis Enrique was trying to do with this Spain team in terms of actually, making them a little bit more direct, and making them a bit more of a tournament team again. And in some ways, this is the most entertaining Spain team we've seen, since even before the Del Bosque era, when they were kind of boring teams to death, even though they had their moments on route to those those 3 tournament wins in a row. Do you think? I mean, I guess we can talk about Germany as well. Where do you see this? It feels almost like the final, doesn't it? This quarter-final between Spain and Germany.
It's such a shame that it's coming early, but it was inevitable once they were drawn in the groups they were, with the path they had. Both topped their groups. Spain, the only side with a completely perfect record so far. I think they've been the best side so far, especially given Germany's struggles in their final game against Switzerland. They also had some nervy moments against Denmark, but we'll maybe touch on that in just a second. But yeah, Spain have been excellent, and you're right to point out the sort of difference in style. So before yesterday, which was statistically a bit of an annihilation, they had 35 shots, possession was through the roof. They actually ranked 10th for possession after the group stages, Spain. Really high dribble numbers, but they were, in terms of committing fouls, they were 3rd. It felt like a very different style Spain, but a much more entertaining one. They got knocked out of the World Cup by Morocco, was it? They had over 1,000 passes in that game alone, and it just felt like passing for passing's sake, no real end product. This one is just lethal. It is going for the jugular at every opportunity. And I think players that you wouldn't expect to thrive in this system are having excellent tournaments. Like Marc Cucurella has been brilliant. Fabian Ruiz, I think, has been one of the top 3 players of the tournament so far. I think even Pedri, like if Pedri could finish as effectively as he can do every other facet of the game, like he's just an excellent player to watch. He's been absolutely sensational. But before we get on to Spain and Germany, props to Georgia as well, because they qualified through the Nations League for this. They finished 4th in their qualifying group, way behind even Scotland and Norway. Well, I think they're 3 points off Norway, but way behind Scotland, let alone Spain. They got beaten 10-2 in 2 games against Spain in qualifying as an aggregate score across those. But the energy they brought, the fun they brought, the quality they brought on various occasions. I say like every turnover they had and the pace they had going forward, it makes sense with the players they've got not to try and dominate the ball, not to try and do slow build-up. They just went for it every time they got the ball. And in a couple of, we talk about Mamardashvili, Kavisha had a brilliant last 2 games as well, nearly scored from the halfway line in this game. That was a really fun moment as well. But Mika Tadze as well, who's now earned to move to Monaco on the back of this tournament, had a really difficult first half of last season at Ajax last year, didn't score in 9 appearances, then went on loan to Metz. I think it was a permanent move to Metz. And has now been, he was on loan, then got bought by Metz this summer, now being sold on to Monaco. And he's going to be looking to replace Wissam Ben Yedder along with Folarin Balogun, etc. next season, Brilon Bolo. They're going to be a lot of fun to watch, Monaco. And on the basis of this, he's got everything in his locker, really. The pace that he plays the game at, the energy, the sort of calmness on the ball in crucial moments as well. Ended the tournament with 3 goals and 1 assist. No one's been involved in more goals. Georgia, if I was wearing a hat, I'd take it off. It was a really, really impressive tournament from you. And it's just so much fun. A debutant reaching the last 16. In terms of the Germany game, wow. 5 p.m. this Friday. I wish it was later in the tournament, but it's a shame. I think at the moment, Spain are favourites. I think, even against Denmark, you look at Højlund had a great chance, kind of snatches at it, shoots it straight at Neuer. There's been more turnover in terms of their starting 11 with Tar being suspended, Schlotterbeck coming in. I think Schlotterbeck played really well, but he definitely has a bit more of a mistake in him than Jonathan Tah does. And then they've got a big call between Mittelstadt and David Raum at left back as well, which is not particularly comfortable one to make. I think they're very comparable players. I think they're both excellent. But the way that they created a number of opportunities in that Denmark game and should have won that game more comfortably as well. Like Kai Havertz was doing everything but score, from open play. He did score that penalty.
Brilliant penalty.
And Musiala as well was sensational once again. I think I favour Spain at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if Germany did. I think it would be an amazing, amazing atmosphere. Strange things can happen in those atmospheres. I say strange. It wouldn't be strange if Germany beat Spain, but at the moment, I'm favouring Spain. I think one of the key clashes is going to be Dani Carvajal trying to contain Jamal Musiala, who's now playing on the left for Germany. Dani Carvajal had a really good second leg of that Champions League game against Bayern Munich, but Musiala was playing central. It was actually Gnabry he was up against, who hadn't had the best season, but it'll be Musiala directly up against Dani Carvajal. That's a real test. And then at the other end of the pitch, Joshua Kimmich, who hasn't played that much at right back over the last few years, trying to contain Nico Williams. Those will be huge. I think those are the key battles for me.
Yeah, and then you talk about Raum and Mittelstadt. You're deciding who goes up against Yamal as well, and obviously Raum earned his place in the last 16 starting lineup off the back of creating that goal for Niklas Füllkrug against Switzerland. Great cross, and I think on balance, like Raum is the better deliverer of a ball from the left than Mittelstadt, but I think Mittelstadt certainly over the last season or two has proven to be the more solid defender, and so Nagelsmann's got a choice to make there, what he prioritises. I think whether he goes for damage limitation down that right, or whether he feels like having Raum overlapping on Musiala is what he wants there. So I think it's going to be fascinating. I do think it could. There's the danger of it turning into a bit of a tactical battle and it maybe being a little bit attritional at points. But I think that will still be fascinating to watch. I look back. One of my favourite Euros games of recent years was the Germany-Italy quarter-final back in 2016 when Simone Zaza famously for the famous penalty. That game was fascinating because Antonio Conte, with a very, very limited Italy side, managed to make them look like one of the best teams in Europe. And Germany under Löw were obviously the world champions at the time of just 2 years. And Italy really took the game to them, and it was just a really, really fascinating watch. And I feel like De La Fuente, Nagelsmann, probably two of the best tacticians at this tournament. I feel like it could, like, if we're lucky, it could be a really kind of entertaining to and fro kind of Spain, 15 minutes of possession followed by Germany 15 minutes of possession, like just really interesting kind of a really interesting battle, hopefully. And then
after that, it might be France or Belgium versus. I would be surprised if Slovenia beat Portugal. But stranger things have happened. But what a night we're set for on Friday night. Quick predictions for this afternoon's games.
Portugal, oh God, yeah.
It's pretty brutal. I'm putting you right on the spot. I'm going to go, I think France get over the line against Belgium, but I'm less and less confident about that. I don't think they played well at all in this tournament. And then I do think Portugal beats Slovenia.
Yeah, to be honest, Dukes, I am one for sticking my neck out on these shows, and it often doesn't come off. So I'm just going to say Portugal and France make it through as well.
Okay,
for the good of the tournament. Okay. I do think. Yeah, I do agree. Though I think there will be a reaction from Belgium against France. I think there has to be, especially when you're playing against a team of that caliber, and you've got the likes of De Bruyne, who's obviously really under pressure, and
Lukaku certainly is as well.
Yeah, I think there will be a reaction, and France and Belgium have played some really good games over the years at tournaments. But I think I agree. I think France will go over the line. It's interesting that Ousmane Dembele might not play in this game. It might be a front two of Mbappe and Thuram, which will be fascinating to see. And a kind of midfield diamond behind them, as they're saying that's going to happen. So that will be interesting. Maybe that will completely backfire, but I still think just the depth that they've got will be too much for Belgium. So Portugal, France in the quarterfinals as well.
Love it. I'm looking forward to watching Jeremy Doku once again as well. I think it's been really fun to watch this tournament. Guys, that was Monday Vibes for this week. What did you guys think of our England breakdown? Get in the comments. Share your thoughts. What would you change? What's your mood after yesterday? Is it more positive than ours? Is it more negative? Let us know. Who do you think is going to win between Germany and Spain on Friday night? And get your predictions for those games this afternoon down there too. We will catch you on Sunday for Sunday Vibes.